Hi, my name's Heather Henyon. I'm the founding partner of Mindshift Capital, and I'm here today to talk to you about boards for early stage startups. I've been a venture investor now for about 7 years, and I've got over 100 investments in early stage tech companies in the US, Europe, and Middle East. I've been living in the region, in the MENA region, for the last 15 years, and I'm involved with a number of different investment groups and angel groups. I'm the founder of Women's Angel Investor Network, or WAIN, which I started in 2014, and I'm also part of Dubai Angel Investors, Next Wave US Impact Fund, Rising Tide Europe, and Co-Fund. I serve on a number of boards. I'm on the board of Secom Holding in Egypt, where I also serve as the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, and I'm a board member of Localized, Needsless, Kids, and Little Thinking Minds. Mindshift Capital is an early stage venture fund. We invest globally in women-led tech companies targeting food tech, fintech, health tech, and ed tech. We are investing in the rise of the millennial, which is foreseeing a disruption of business models based on new consumer values that we see changing globally, and of course accelerated by COVID-19. We apply a gender lens, which means that we invest in companies where there's at least one female founder who's also on the management team. And to date, we've invested in about 7 companies. Some of them you may know from the Middle East region, and a couple are based in the US, and we just recently closed our latest investment in Singapore. So I want to start out just by talking about what is corporate governance, how does it work? There are different ways to frame it. So first is just investor governance, and that happens at the investor level. Investors are most concerned about things like fundraising, M&A, debt, and then of course a change in capital structure of the business and then scope of the business. So going into new markets, expansion, joint ventures. Board of directors is really the one who is exercising oversight of the business. So they're going to be the ones who approve the annual operating budget. They look at quarterly financial reviews. They're involved more on a strategic level where they assess performance, and also the executive team. They also are involved in fundraising, any M&A activity. They're responsible for audits and approving the audit, and executive compensation. And if needed, they also are the ones who are involved in hiring and firing at the executive team level. Executive management, which is where most founders sit, they really are the ones involved operationally in the business. So in strategy, monthly budgets, hiring and firing of team members, financial results, and then of course the different divisions of a company: sales, marketing, pricing, product support, human resources, and finance. So the most common question I get from founders is, when do we set up a board? My answer is as soon as possible. So choose the right directors and engage them actively. One of the biggest mistakes that I've observed in my investment experience of working with so many early stage companies is that they don't form the board early enough. We know that only 1 in 10 companies make it, and so that means that 9 of the 10 that fail, 2/3 of that is due to issues at the founding team level. And really it's what I would call self-inflicted wounds. So that means issues internally about founding team, the team roles, the equity, participation in things like options, and then I would say overconfidence. So founders tend to think that they know everything and often overestimate what they know and perhaps underestimate what they don't know, which is a reason again to bring on a board. Mistake number 2, I would say, is populating the board with friends and family. So although they might be the angels coming in the very beginning, or the 3 Fs, as we say, the friends, family, and fools, they're not necessarily the people that you want to put on your board. So you really need directors who can make decisions that are in the best interest of your business. And something that we talk about often is fiduciary responsibility. That means that a director must put the interests of the company ahead of their own interests. So this is actually quite challenging when you look at some of the interests that investors might have, or maybe the financial interests that they might be more interested in ahead of the sometimes interest of the startup. Who should be on the board? So this is a second question. So founders are on the board, investors will join the board depending on the funding round, and then you might also have an independent board director, and this is usually an outside person who joins, I would say, usually around the Series A round, and they're there because they don't have any vested interest in the business, but so they can't be an investor, but they're there because they might have domain expertise in the business. For example, if you're an ed tech company, you might want to bring on an independent who's got actual operational experience in education, who's worked 20 years in the business or in the industry. So it just depends also on what the other mix of the board directors are and how to offset that or complement that. Fred Wilson, who's one of my kind of heroes in VC, he's a partner with Union Square Ventures in New York, and he's been working in VC now, I think, since the 1980s or 90s. And he just says, boards should not be controlled by the founder, the CEO, or the largest shareholder. For a board to do its job, it must represent all stakeholders' interests, not just one stakeholder's interest. So I think that's really important and something to think about when you're considering the composition of the board. Depending on the stage of the business, and here I'm only focusing on early stage, so I'm looking mainly at seed rounds and then Series A rounds. Anything at Series B would be a different story, and beyond that, at the growth stage, would have a different board setup. But at seed round, my recommendation usually is, and what I see most commonly are 2 founders and then maybe 1 seed investor who's on the board. Again, it depends on the number of founders you've got in your business. If you're a solo founder, it might be a different setup. So if you've got 5 founders, not all of them should be on the board. They would then nominate 2 of the 5 to represent the founders on the board. So, so it really just depends. Series A round, the board usually expands at that point. And generally we would see 5 members of the board, so 2 founders and 2 investors, 1 from the Series A round and then 1 from the seed round, and then 1 independent. So this would be the time you bring an independent director on. So odd numbers are good, and that's because usually there's 1 vote per person. If you've got an odd number, that means you don't end up with a tie vote. And the other thing I just want to mention here is that I've seen founders, especially first-time founders, put the lead investor as the board director. And that makes a lot of sense logically, but what I want to mention next is probably relevant to this decision as well. So it's really important that founders choose directors who care about their business. And I like this quote a lot also from Fred Wilson, where there are lots of different things you can look for in board members. So maybe you want somebody who's got good financial experience because the founders might be techies or creative, so they don't have that background. But really the key ingredient, and I've seen this from the boards that I've been on, the ones who really add the most value to the board are the ones who care the most. So you do have to do a lot of work as a board member, and the ones who show up unprepared often aren't able to serve in the role well, but the ones who really make the time for it, who understand it's a strong people business, and the chemistry of the board, the relationships in the board meetings, but also offline, are really critical. So you've got to make a lot of time just to build those, and that takes time. There's really no way to shortcut that. But I would say when you're looking at your board composition, it really is important to think about this ability of whether or not the person cares about the business and how deeply they care. Another mistake I've seen is basically putting big name investors on the board, and the reality is if somebody's got hundreds of companies that they're an investor in their portfolio, they probably and they're on, 30 boards, they probably aren't going to be able to spend a lot of time on your board. So think about, just what you're looking for, and putting a big name on the board doesn't carry a lot of weight if they aren't able to either show up for board meetings or just aren't accessible outside of the board meeting, because you really do need, especially at early stage, you really do need people who are going to be hands-on. So often there is a chair of the board. There are different ways to manage this. You can have a rotating chair, and that chair would be somebody who chairs each meeting. So each meeting, the chair of the board would change per meeting, but generally it's not best practice to put the CEO as also the chair of the board. So what I've seen often is that it would be either one of the investors or the independent who would chair the board. Board meetings. So these can be quite time consuming and take up a lot of energy from founders. So the questions usually are, when do you have them? How often? How long are they? Who should attend the board meeting? For example, do you include other members of the team? Who sets the agenda? And then what decisions are there to be made? And these are all the things to consider when you're thinking about the board meeting. So I'll talk about this some more in the following slides. In terms of how often should a board meet, for seed stage companies, my rule of thumb is monthly. And this doesn't mean that you're getting a big board pack and you're spending hours preparing for the meeting and financial statements. This really is a more informal board at this stage. So there should be board minutes and board resolutions, but really that part should be pretty minimal. So really I would say the board members are acting more, I would say, in an operational capacity to help the founders to get to the next level. Series A level companies, generally they would meet quarterly. It depends also what's happening. So let's say there's a big acquisition occurring or a big team change, you might want to schedule more frequent meetings just to kind of keep on top of things. But the general rule is quarterly. During COVID, I know a lot of boards, Series A and later, have been meeting monthly. Even corporate boards from Fortune 500 companies are meeting monthly. So it depends again on what the circumstances are, but generally this is what's expected. How to prepare for a board meeting. So best practice would be getting the information from the company 10 days with the agenda before the meeting, asking the directors to provide feedback on the agenda. So are there other things they want to discuss, things that aren't in there, things that we don't need to discuss because we already are up to date on them. And then usually the company should send the board pack 1 week before the meeting to the directors. And something that I like a lot that I don't see a lot of people doing, but is basically where the slides get shared via Google Docs in advance of the meeting to capture immediate comments and then also save some time during the meeting. So you already know if you've gotten a bunch of comments about, let's say, a new budget item or a new org structure or team members, that those are going to be topics you need to discuss more during the meeting, and you sort of know what the questions are going to be, so that can help save time. And this also, by the way, is where the chair should really play a strong role. So the chair, even though the company is preparing the information because they've got all the documentation, the chair really is working very closely, usually with the CEO and co-founder, to basically put together the agenda, get feedback, and then figure out what the materials are that should be shared. But hopefully this becomes somewhat standardized after the first couple of meetings so that it doesn't take up a lot of time for the company to prepare. Something to highlight here, the best meetings really should be discussions and debate, not updates. So this isn't a forum where we just want the CEO to just come and report to everyone. We want to really discuss key strategic issues and key items that are challenges, opportunities, and really at a very prioritized level. So not little things like minutia that can be solved operationally and tactically, but really the key strategic questions. Best practices are that there's a board minutes book that's kept, and that would contain all the minutes from the board meetings. And this will often be requested, by the way, from investors and be provided in a data room when a company is raising capital. So it is key to have this. I've seen a number of times where there might be really good board meetings, but the minutes just don't get done, or they get done 6 months later, and then by that point everyone's forgotten what the meeting was about. So it's important, one, to do this, and then two, to make it timely. So if you have a company secretary, then who could be one of the management team members, ask them to take minutes. Sometimes outside legal counsel will do it. I've even seen some of them do it pro bono. So that's another option. And really what you want to do is you want to circulate the minutes within 1 week via DocuSign or electronically. Ask for edits and changes, and then make sure that the directors who attended that meeting sign the minutes, because sometimes things are not clear, or there are things that are inaccurate that that directors should also be signing off on. Best practices would be for specific decisions like approving a budget, approving an operating plan for the year. Those should be agreed separately through a board resolution, and again, those should be circulated and signed by all the board directors. So better than just recording them in minutes, but to actually call them out as separate board resolutions makes it more visible. In the end, just to close, boards really matter. When they're effective, they can be a tremendous asset to a company at any stage. When toxic, boards can be a tremendous liability to a company, especially in the early stage. So really leverage your board. Think about it as a great resource for companies, for growth, for the next stage, and also for learning. For a lot of the founders, this is the first time that they're managing a board and reporting to a board. So it is a different activity altogether. Try to focus on diversity. So the more diverse the board is, probably the more effective it will be, because you won't have the groupthink you get if you've got 5 people all from the same background, same gender, same professional background. So having diversity at lots of different levels does actually increase the success of the board. Chemistry is key. So invest the time in building the relationships and good communication channels, both in and out of board meetings. Often board members will just meet one-on-one for lunch or a coffee, and it actually helps a lot in terms of the meeting room. A lot of the discussions happen outside the boardroom. So investing in those relationships and building the communication between the various board members is also really helpful for the company. And last but not least, try to prioritize the board role even when it's not urgent. So just because we're not in, let's say, a global pandemic or a crisis doesn't mean that you shouldn't be prioritizing the board. Make sure that you're having regularly scheduled meetings, you're giving people enough notice so that they can put it into their calendars, and then you're following up on some of the decisions and the follow-up activities from the board afterwards. So if you've got a list of activities that you need to take care of after the board meeting, take care of them before the next board meeting and make sure to report back to everyone. Thank you very much for your time. I also would recommend this book called Startup Boards by Brad Felt, and I think it's very helpful for startups. Thank you.